Okay, right now I'm going to talk about the Nintendo Entertainment System. Now, this is something different than what I normally am going to be talking about. Or maybe I'll just do different stuff from time to time. So, the Nintendo Entertainment System, I have to get back in my time machine to go back to, I don't know, 1986? Well, why don't I go back to when it's actually established? Let's see, about 1988, April 1988. And if you want to time travel, anybody, the thing that you really need, you just need some sort of a noise that sounds like what time travel, and then you're there. But if I could get one, then maybe I could get back to 1988, and then I could come back here and tell you all about it. So, well, here's, I don't know. Well, I'm back. Okay, I just got back from April 1988, and spent a lot of time there so I could get used to the Nintendo Entertainment System. The big deal was between the two consoles, the Sega Master System and the Nintendo Entertainment System, which one do you buy? Well, a lot of it you think about these arcade games that were out, and you go to the arcade and you have certain favorites, and then you might decide which console you would rather have based on that. Now, a big game at the time was Double Dragon, and if you could play that at home, that would be great, because it was like the first two-player cooperative game that most people that I know actually played. I liked Ghosts and Goblins. I couldn't get past the first stage, but who cares? It was just fun to play, and so when you look at that, and I hadn't played Mario yet. I didn't even know who Mario was. Mario was the guy that worked at Pizza Chalet down the street. I didn't know about Mario and Luigi. I didn't know about Duck Hunt and all those other games, because you just see the commercials. But there was so much stuff back then on commercials that everything kind of gets drowned into it.
Whoa, did you check out those graphics? Nice graphics, man. Where can I get a hold of something like that? On the Nintendo Entertainment System. Where else? Dude, look at that. You're playing Ghosts and Goblins at home. I know. Check out Castlevania. Whoa, is that Count Dracula? There's more. Skeletal Warriors? There's more. Headless Medusas? There's more. Whoa, Double Dragon at home? Yep. You have all the arcade hits. And Ghosts and Goblins.
You hear the name Zelda, and it's just like a whole lot of other stuff. They had Transformers and everything else. When it becomes a part of your life is when you actually spend nights playing the game instead of doing your homework. Super Mario Brothers, when I first saw my friends playing the video game, after I time traveled back, of course, I was amazed by this game because it was so much fun, but it was so simple but so much fun. It was like a perfect idea. Those really great ideas where everything just goes together perfectly. And you could go through the warp zone, and sometimes I just like to play every level, because I like the way they looked. Everything was so cool. The music, the whole thing, it's just like you get drawn into it. So it's really hard to put the game down once you start playing it. Back then, it was so much fun. And Zelda, I couldn't figure out what to do when I got the game. I just spent, most of the time, I spent 4 hours straight just running around the overworld map, figuring out what to do, and it was so much fun. It was so much fun playing that game, and I didn't even know what to do. And you would think about the game might be emerged into your mind, and you might be doing something else, and you still have that in there. The particular one that I got came with a guide that had some strategy in it, and it showed a lot of the video games that were out at that point. And this is before they just started making so many garbage games, because, once you have something great, and then they start watering it down by overexploitation, which really, until the 90s, there was a certain level of standard, but this is when it really starts to take off to just drown something in garbage, because all these companies start putting out these garbage games. I know this happened with the Atari at a certain point, and just everybody started making games. And so you go, well, there's no standard of excellence to that. But I think it got worse as time went on. I know you could say, well, Atari was really bad with all these garbage titles that they put out for it. But these weren't actually companies that had any, I know E.T. was a piece of garbage too. So maybe you could say, well, that's when they, but I mean, as far as it doing it in every avenue with everything, just overdoing stuff. You know, not showing any restraint or putting restraint on something to keep everything at a higher level, you know, because the Nintendo seal of quality ended up just becoming completely meaningless. You know, there's a lot of games that have that Nintendo seal of quality that they were so terrible that a 5-year-old could probably make a better game. Besides that, there was a lot of excitement about this because it's like you could play arcade games at home, which you really couldn't, but you sort of could because it wasn't the actual game. It was a lot different. Maybe they were just as good in a different way. And you might spend a lot of time beating your Nintendo up because you get mad at the game and you blame the game. A lot of times people think that the game is alive, that the computer is cheating against you, and you punch that Nintendo and you throw that controller. And for 10 minutes, you're in a divorce from your Nintendo. That only lasts about 10 minutes before you give it one more try and you're back playing it. 12 hours later, you finally give up again. It changed a lot of society because, you know, a lot of kids were outside before then playing guns and Transformers and all this other stuff. Once that came out, there was a lot less people outside. It was so amazing how the Nintendo changed so many things because I think it even changed Halloween. It had become so used to kids not being outside, and then on Halloween, because it used to be there was like 1 million kids everywhere on Halloween. If you watch that scene in E.T., and I know that changed also from a lot of other stuff that happened too, and this trend never changed back. It used to be there would be 1 million kids running all over the place. That's what they did. But once they got the Nintendo, or the Sega Master System, they were inside playing it. So this was even different than the Atari, because the Atari was more of like, it was a casual thing. You only played it for a little and went and did something else. Nintendo was such a time-consuming thing. It was real time-consuming. Atari, you could just play it for a couple minutes and go do something else. That's what people did with Atari and those other consoles that were out at the time. What I was saying about the quality, again, like Transformers and He-Man and all those other, and G.I. Joe, they actually made a lot of quality products until you get to 88. And then those things, they just start throwing out whatever. That's why I'm saying about like the level of quality of stuff, because there was a certain standard, except for Atari. Just like Atari and those other game consoles. Well, I don't know if Intellivision and all of them actually went that route, but they probably had some stupid games on there, like Betty Crocker Bake a Cake or something. Maybe that was the first real point of over-exploitation of a product like that, but for the most part, there was a standard of quality for even movies. Yeah, they would still put a lot of stupid movies out, garbage, but not as much as like now. Because it used to be in like 80 or 82 up to, you would only see like one preview before your movie because they didn't have that many movies coming out all the time, so there was a higher standard for movies even. And then, even though there was a lot of garbage movies, then you might go to a different theater to have to see these movies. There wasn't like 1 million different movies of the same thing coming out every time. There was maybe a couple copies of something. Now they just copy everything. It's like with music and all the way through, it's just a copy of something else. Originality. But there was a lot of originality with games like Super Mario and with The Legend of Zelda and Metroid. And those are games in Castlevania. You would play them and you would get so immersed into the game, not into the game world, because you know, it's Nintendo, and you still realize it's just because it was so much fun, and it was so cool to play those games. They were so much fun. You would trade them with everybody that was in your circle. So you didn't have to go buy the games, and you might think this is kind of like piracy because you're not buying the game. There was no such thing as piracy back then, really. It's just like, you have this game, I have this game, you borrow this, I borrow that. If you had one game, you could play every other Nintendo game. That's how it worked. Because you could trade with somebody. You could always find somebody to trade a Nintendo game just to borrow it. And I'm borrowing this one, and you borrow that one, and oh no, I got Rambo. Great. Give me that Top Gun. Oh, now I got Top Gun. You could play, and you know, people didn't know if these games sucked. So if you had a sucky game, you could still, because they want to try it. And then, you know, you might get a good game to play for until you have to trade it back or something, you know. So I was able to play a lot of video games that way. You know, they didn't have renting video games right at the beginning from the video store. No, you didn't have this going out at a steady thing for a while. That wasn't like maybe until 89 when that was a big deal, or 90 to even go and do that, because you have one game, you could just trade it with somebody at school. There were people at school who would bring their Nintendo games and trade them with each other to go play another, to go borrow another game and play it.
Shut up, dude. You don't have Nintendo. You have Pretendo.
Really, the Nintendo Entertainment System looked cool, and the controllers looked cool. The whole thing looked like Space Age, but that's how they were doing things at the time. They were more in the future than we are today. back in those days because the way they did things looked more futuristic. The video games looked cool, the cartridges looked cool, the covers, some of them look cool, some of them look like garbage, but it still looked cool because of certain features, the way that the Nintendo made it. Well, unless it's like one of those second-rate games that some other company made that they might have a really terrible box art on it. I don't know. The Master System, at the beginning, there was like a indecision between the two, but Nintendo pulled away so quickly from that once you go to the Nintendo, you already knew. And there's still people that like the Master System, and there might be some things better about the Master System, but I really never got a chance to play it. Most people that I knew had a Nintendo. I think I knew like 2 or 3 different people who had the Master System. So if you wanted to trade games with somebody, I think it would be a lot more difficult with that. It looked cool, the games looked cool. Of course, the games didn't look a lot like the cover. You would look at the cover and think, whoa, this game's gonna be, wait a minute, this isn't the same thing. I think that's pretty much all I could say about the Nintendo Entertainment System. Just going with the overview. In 1988, of course, where I was time traveled to. This is kind of when the 80s are just completely changing, because before that, it was a different type of environment, I think, and this is when it starts becoming the 90s, so you see the switching over. You know, things start becoming a lot less colorful and more serious, because that's really what the 90s, you might think, well, the 90s were colorful, but not compared to the 80s, but compared to 2000, they were colorful. There's always a carryover of the year before as you move into the next part, and really, I don't know, the 80s kind of seemed like an accident, really, because it was so different than any other time period because of the way everything was. It's like if you just poured every time period has something, you just took a bunch of sugar and you just made a sugar rush, like you just poured so much sugar into a year between 83 and 87. Remember, they used to have to use typewriters back in those days. I mean, you would see commercials for a typewriter. Imagine if you had to use that to do all your office work nowadays. You know when they had to push the thing back? And then they have to push the thing across again? You probably don't even know what I'm talking about, but that's what they used to have to do, and you don't have to do that nowadays. They had word processing programs, and that was kind of a newer thing in the 80s, in the early 80s, but a lot of people still had those typewriters if you had an electronic typewriter. Whoa. But it was awesome. It kind of, you appreciated things more. If you got, like the Nintendo, you didn't have a whole bunch of video game systems, so super powered and all that. These things were still kind of new, because it was like, at the beginning when you had Atari, you look on the screen, oh, I'm moving, you're moving that with the controller? Because I time traveled back to 1982. People were like, whoa, you're moving that square. Like, that's not what they were saying, but they were thinking, like, you can move something on TV with a controller. And that was a big thrill by itself. So imagine with the Nintendo. Oh, you played arcade, fun at the home. And then, you know, Time Out Arcade, this arcade that you just have tons of games. And so you get so excited when you go in there and, you know, just having a quarter and having to put it in. Because it's so much just to have a quarter to play these games. And then you got it at home. And you know you own it. And you feel like you own an arcade game almost, even though you really don't. But still, it's had a whole bigger thrill than the games today, because I think people take it for granted. It's not the same thing. There's not the level of appreciation that people had, because you had to spend like $50 to get one game, and when you got it, you might have the crappiest game, but you still keep playing it. And maybe you want to convince yourself it's a better game than it really is because you own it. Now that's yours, so you have to kind of root for it so that you can make it feel like it's a better game. Unless you have a really garbage game like Rambo or something. I used to play that game for like 20 hours a day, you know. And it sucked. But but it was fun playing it. Even if it sucked. Even games that sucked were still fun to play. Or I wouldn't kept playing it, you know. You would have probably turned it off at some point. Maybe I didn't play it for 20 hours straight. I mean, 20 hours straight with a knife running around, killing birds and ducks and snakes. It was still so much fun to control the guy on the screen and throw him around and to find out what's next in the video game. There's a whole different environment for playing the games in your mind, mentally. A mental environment for playing the Nintendo Entertainment System back in the 80s. Because it was a different experience. And if you lived in the 80s and played it then, would be different than now getting a Nintendo Entertainment System and playing it, because it's not the same thing. The world was different, the way people thought was different, and the games were different, Yeah, they're not like a bunch of graphics coming at you with terrible controls and just a stupid idea for a video game. Although there were those, of course, but it wasn't like now where they might have fancy graphics comparatively, and they still suck compared to today's standards, and they might ship out a bunch of these games. I'm not too impressed by video games of today. I don't think they take as much thought as far as the design. I think it's just they get an idea and then they put the graphics and sound in it, and you use this voice when you describe stuff like that. And then you get this game, and it's a pile of nothing. You don't want to play this game. But if you had one game back then, and it's really sucked, you would still play TNC Surf Designs or something. And some people might like these games, so that's fine. Because I played a lot of them, and I played them for a long time. And TNC Surf Designs, I played that. Couldn't figure out really what to do as much, and I still played it for, I don't know, maybe a week before I got sleep again. I went back to sleep. I went to school in between. I was still playing the game in my mind when I was in school, probably. This was all when I time traveled back to 1988, of course. So maybe I'll time travel again. That's the Nintendo Entertainment System, and I'll probably be talking about some of the video games.
Whoa, I'd like to get my hands on that game.
It's 1942 for the Nintendo Entertainment System.
That looks just like the arcade game.
Yep,
Whoa, what game is that?
Metroid.
How do you play?
No time to explain. Here, just take the control and try for yourself.
This game rocks!